Man, let me spill the beans about my marriage, all right. Me and my wife, Hilly, we've been rocking together for almost 2 decades now. Can you believe it? Our anniversary's creeping up real soon, like December 10th. And let me tell you, I wouldn't swap a thing about our life together. Sure, we've had our share of knockdown, drag-out fights, but the making up? Oh, it's always been worth it. That's just how we roll, you know. But let's rewind a bit, back to the early days. Second year into our journey together, we hit this rough patch. But apart from that hiccup, smooth sailing all the way. We tied the knot young, me at 20, Hilly at just 18. We've known each other since we were knee-high to a grasshopper, living right around the corner from each other. My older brother Bob had already tied the knot with Hilly's sister Pam a year earlier, so for us, taking that leap felt like the most natural next step. Now, here's the kicker. Bob and Pam, they had a little bundle of joy within their first year of marriage. But luck wasn't exactly on our side. We went through all sorts of tests, despite the doctors advising us to take it easy and let nature do its thing. But Hilly's mom, bless her heart, she kept nudging us to start a family, especially since she was all about that grandson life after having nothing but daughters herself. Test results? Inconclusive. Hilly was okay, but yours truly had a slightly low sperm count or something like that. Honestly, I never fully wrapped my head around all the medical jargon. Doctors, they assured us it wasn't anything to lose sleep over, just to be patient, and our little bundle of joy would show up right on cue. And wouldn't you know it, they were spot on. Third year into our marriage, boom, Hilly pops out a beautiful baby girl named Linda. It eased our worries, you know, about whether we could even have kids. From then on, smooth sailing. Hilly gets pregnant again, and lo and behold, Tom comes into the world, our little prince. The whole family's over the moon. Now, don't get me wrong, we adore our daughters, but having a son? It felt like hitting the jackpot. I was the first in the family to have a son, and you bet I strutted around telling Bob about it. He just smirked and said to give it time. Well, time did its thing, 'cause the following year, they welcomed their first son too. 8 months later, another son, Mike, joined the crew. It was like buses, man. You wait for ages, then several come at once. With 2 boys and 2 girls, we were living the dream. One big, happy family. Even when Hilly's other sisters got hitched, they became part of our tight-knit crew. It was bliss, you know. Always someone around to keep an eye on the kids when we needed a breather. But life's got its curveballs, ain't it? Like when Bob had that work accident. I felt like I was right there with him as they pumped my blood into him. But he pulled through, and I was just fine, cracking jokes about us being true blood brothers. So here we are, inching closer to our 20th anniversary, planning a big ol' shindig. But little did I know, the bombshell that was about to drop, changing everything. Our 20th anniversary's creeping up, and me and the gang are trying to figure out how to make it memorable. Bob and Pam, they had their bash the year before. And man, it was a blast. So naturally we thought, why not do something similar? We go all out, booking a private room at the local hotel for this big shebang, inviting all our nearest and dearest. But then there's Linda. Let me tell you about Linda. 17 years old, beautiful as a picture. She's like a spitting image of her mom, maybe even prettier. Dark brown locks that shine under the lights, and those eyes, man, big and green, like they're pulling you in. Now, here's the thing about Linda. She's a heartbreaker. Got a string of boyfriends trailing after her, and our house? Always got one of them hanging around. But hey, she's got her head screwed on right, so we just roll with it, you know. Then there's Tom, my boy. Solid as a rock, just like his old man. Loves his rugby, just like me and Bob did back in the day. At almost 16, he's already tearing up the field, playing fly half for his school's first team. But young Mike, now he's a different story. The baby of the bunch, going through a rough patch. Not as sporty as Tom, not as popular as Linda. Poor kid, he's struggling, you know. Nothing serious, just your typical teenage angst. Smart as a whip, though, probably even sharper than the other two. But on this particular day, man, maybe I should have cut him some slack. I find him, sulking away, leaving a mess on the dining table. And what do? Lay down the law, of course. You're not going anywhere until you've cleaned up, Mike, I tell him, firm as can be. But does he listen? Nah, He pushes back, losing his cool, shouting about being singled out. I try to keep my cool, I really do, but he's pushing all my buttons. I'm your father, and you'll do as I say, I fire back. But then, out of nowhere, he hits me with it. My father, huh? You sure about that? I freeze, man. The air's thick with tension, my heart pounding in my chest. But before I can even process what he's said, he's apologizing, his face twisted in pain. Sorry, Dad, I didn't mean it, he mumbles, avoiding my gaze as he cleans up the mess. And just like that, he's gone, leaving me standing there, lost in my thoughts, wondering if my whole world's about to come crashing down around me. Mike, my youngest, he's always been a bit of an oddball compared to his siblings. More studious, more serious, but less outgoing, you know. I used to wonder why he was so different, even talked it over with Hilly, but she just brushed it off, told me I was reading too much into things. But then, out of the blue, he drops that bombshell on me, and man, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, if he'd just yelled it in anger and stormed off, I'd have been upset, sure, but that would have been it. But no, he goes and apologizes, takes it all back. And that got me thinking, you know, what does he know that I don't? I'll tell you, my mind was racing a mile a minute. First thing I wanted to do was march right up to Hilly and demand some answers. But what good would that do, huh? Accuse her of cheating, and even if she hadn't, how would she ever forgive me for doubting her? Besides, it's been, what, 16 years? But does time even matter when it comes to stuff like this? My stomach's doing backflips, and I'm feeling sick to my core. Then it hits me, like a light bulb going off in my head. Blood types. That's the ticket. So off I go to our study, digging through the kids' medical records. Linda, Tom, and Mike, all O positive, just like me. And for a moment, I breathe a sigh of relief. But then reality sinks in. Blood types don't tell the whole story, do they? If Mike had a different type, that'd be one thing, but them all sharing the same? Could just be a coincidence, and that thought's enough to send shivers down my spine. So here I am, grappling with this idea of DNA testing, like some kind of soap opera plotline. Overreacting, you might say, but when Mike's avoiding eye contact at dinner and skulking off without a word, well, it's got me rattled, you know. Hilly's picking up on it too, asking what's up with Mike. But I'm drawing blanks, and they're not giving anything away. So once the kids clear out, I finally muster up the courage to broach the subject with Hilly. Mike's sticking out like a sore thumb, I tell her. Any thoughts on why? But she shuts it down, quick as you like. Let's not go there, Davy, she says, brushing it off like it's nothing. Is she dodging the issue, or does she genuinely not care? Your guess is as good as mine. But then I'm thinking, why not DNA testing? So there I am, burning the midnight oil, researching it online, drowning in information, but still no closer to a solution. It takes me until Monday morning to find a lab that'll do the test, and let me tell you, explaining to my secretary why I need it done is a whole other ordeal. But I bite the bullet, send off the samples, all 3 kids and one of my own, cross my fingers, and wait for the results. You ever tried snagging a hair from your grown-up kids? Let me tell you, it ain't no walk in the park, especially with Mike dodging me like I'm carrying the plague. But hey, I managed it, got those strands sent off, and now all there was left to do was wait. Wait and wonder if Mike was really my son. Over the next week, Mike seemed to settle down, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Probably relieved I hadn't brought up his outburst, but man, it was eating me up inside. I felt like I was tiptoeing on eggshells, trying to find the right moment to broach the subject with him. But I figured, best to hold off until those results came in. Didn't want to stir the pot before I had all the facts, you know. Meanwhile, life went on. Same old routine with Hilly. Bless her heart. She carried on being her loving self, none the wiser about the storm brewing inside me. We went through the motions, but I couldn't shake off those doubts gnawing at me, eating away at my insides. One evening, we're having dinner with my brother and his wife, and I'm on the verge of spilling my guts to him. I mean, we're practically 2 peas in a pod, so if anyone would understand, it'd be him, right? But something held me back. Didn't want to burden him with my troubles, didn't want to admit to myself that this could be the end of everything I held dear. So I kept quiet, played it cool when Hilly asked if I was okay. Told her I had a few things on my mind, brushed it off like it was nothing. She looked worried, sure, but I plastered on a smile and carried on like everything was hunky-dory. Then, the moment of truth arrived. Results came in, and I made sure to have them sent to my office. Didn't want Hilly getting to them first and opening Pandora's box. And let me tell you, ripping open that envelope was like tearing off a Band-Aid. Heart pounding, hands trembling. I read through the report, trying to make sense of the jargon. And would you believe it? Mike's results matched mine. Relief flooded through me, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Thanking my lucky stars I hadn't spilled my guts to Hilly, I made a mental note to make it up to her, maybe take her out to dinner, show her how much she meant to me. But then I noticed something in the fine print, something I'd overlooked before. The lab wanted me to call them to discuss the results. Now, I could have just brushed it off, figured they were trying to squeeze some extra cash out of me. But something told me to make that call, to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. So I dialed the number, heart in my throat, and introduced myself as Davy Jones, the man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. So after providing some references, I finally got through to the doctor. "Hello, Mr. Jones," he greeted me. "Have you had a chance to review the results we sent you?" "Yes," I replied confidently. It seems that my worries about my son Mike were unfounded. "Yes, indeed," he responded. "But it's not quite that simple, I'm afraid," he added, and my heart sank as I waited for him to deliver the bad news. "You mean he's not my son?" I stammered. "It's not that, Mr. Jones," he clarified. "There's less than a 1 in a million chance that he's not your biological child. I am certain that he is your natural-born son. So Mike is my real son?" I sighed in relief. "Yes, he is, Mr. Jones," he confirmed. "Then what's the problem?" I asked, feeling uncertain. What else could be wrong? I was starting to worry because I had heard that DNA testing could also reveal genetic diseases. "It's the other 2 samples you sent in," the doctor said heavily. "What about the samples from your son's brother and sister?" I asked, feeling a surge of panic. "Is there something wrong with one of them?" "Well, it seems that they are only half-siblings to your youngest son, Mr. Jones," the doctor explained. "Half-siblings?" I stuttered in shock. "What does that mean, doctor?" "What's a half-sibling?" "It means, Mr. Jones," he continued, "that it's highly unlikely that you are their biological father." The phone slipped from my grip, and the next thing I knew, I was surrounded by my concerned key workers as I struggled to regain consciousness. "Give him some air," someone called out as I slowly came to, gasping for breath. "Are you okay, Davy?" Another voice asked, and I nodded weakly, attempting to stand. They helped me back into my chair, chatting among themselves about the workload and the office temperature. It all seemed so trivial compared to the bombshell I had just received. Thankfully, someone arranged for me to be driven home and urged me to take the rest of the day off. Grateful to find the house empty upon my arrival, with Hilly at work and the kids at school, I knew what I had to do next. I dreaded making the call, but I knew I had to do it. With trembling fingers, I dialed the laboratory's number again, and soon I was speaking with the doctor once more, apologizing for the abrupt ending of our previous conversation. "No worries, Mr. Jones," he reassured me. "Our postal service can be tricky to navigate at times." I assured him that I understood, and he patiently reviewed the test results with me once more. "Mike is definitely your son," he confirmed, "but Linda and Tom are unlikely to be your biological children." But the results showed good or close matches. I pleaded, could there be a mistake? "If we had only 1 sample, we might request another for verification," I explained. "But with 2 samples, the likelihood is nearly certain," he explained. "While Linda and Tom are full siblings, it's improbable that you're their father." "But you said the matches were close," I insisted, clinging to a glimmer of hope. "What does that mean?" "Do you have a twin or a brother, Mr. Jones?" The doctor cautiously inquired, or perhaps another relative. "My brother," I exclaimed, a surge of excitement coursing through me. "What does my brother have to do with this situation?" "You'll have to come to your own conclusions, Mr. Jones," the doctor's voice droned on, but I wasn't really listening anymore. My world had suddenly shattered into pieces. What should I do now? End my marriage? Sever my lifelong bond with my brother? You can't choose your family after all. Should I just pretend I didn't know anything? Keep living a lie? I couldn't bear it. And what about Mike? He knew something was wrong, but he had the wrong idea. From now on, I'd see my son in a different way, but I couldn't love Linda and Tom any less. They were my kids, no matter whose genes they carried, and no piece of paper could change that. But what about Hilly? That was the real question. What about that witch and my jerk of a brother, too? And Pam, my sister-in-law, how would they react to the news? How would the rest of the family handle it? So many questions were swirling in my head. Oh God, this was all so complicated, and I didn't feel ready to deal with it. I vaguely remember stepping out of the front door and starting to walk down the street, but the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital with bandages all over my arms. I had stumbled in front of a car while completely wasted, but I didn't remember any of that at the time. Davy, are you all right? I turned to see who had asked, but it hurt. It hurt like crazy. Then I recognized the voice and realized it was my ex-wife speaking to me. Not really, not yet anyway, I replied. She was still my wife. I didn't say much, couldn't find the right words. What was I supposed to say? Hey honey, just found out 2 of our kids aren't mine, and you've been messing around with my brother. How was your day? What's for dinner? Yeah, that didn't sound quite right, did it? Anyway, it turned out my injuries weren't too serious, and they sent me home the next day. I couldn't do much for myself, so I relied on Hilly to take care of me. It gave me time to think, time to plan, but honestly, it felt like a waste of time because I still didn't know what to do. The main concern now was Mike and the other 2 kids. Whatever decision I made had to be in their best interest, even if it meant sacrificing my own. Hilly's needs came last. From then on, all I knew was our 20th anniversary was coming up, and the room was booked for our big dinner. I had to figure things out by then. Within about a week, I was more or less back to normal, at least physically. Everything seemed to fall back into place while I contemplated my next move. But Mike was different. He seemed like he was on the edge, just the right age to act out. You should talk to him, Davy, Hilly said one evening. I don't know what's bothering him. He doesn't seem to want to talk to me anymore. I'll have a chat with him, I promised. Any idea what's going on with him? She asked me. I've got a few ideas, I said shortly. Want to talk about them, Davy? She asked. Not really, I replied, catching her off guard. The chance came the next day when I found him alone in his room, and he couldn't avoid me. Want to talk about what's bothering you, son? I began gently. He just shook his head, not wanting to open up. Is it about the other day, Mike? So, about our relationship, I pressed, noticing a maturity in him that surprised me. You don't understand, Dad, he challenged me. I might know more than you think, son, I countered, trying to keep a smile on my face. Then why don't you do something about it, Dad? He pushed back. Why do you let them get away with it? Wait, this wasn't going the way I expected. It seemed like we were talking about something else entirely. Get away with what, son? I asked, confused. You really don't know, Dad, he repeated. Apparently not, son, I admitted. It's Mom and Uncle Tim, Dad, he whispered. When you're at work, once a month or so. It's so embarrassing. Uncle Tim, darn it, I muttered under my breath. Tim wasn't Hilly's husband. He was married to another one of Hilly's sisters. Oh, that, I mumbled pathetically, unable to think of anything else to say. They've been doing it for years, Dad, my son informed me solemnly. Linda thinks I'm Tim's son, not yours. With that, he broke down in tears, and I wrapped my arms around him to comfort him. It had been a long time since I'd done that, and I was surprised by how big and strong my little boy felt. I can guarantee you, Mike, I assured him as I continued to hold him, you are my son in every way, not Tim's. How do you know, Dad? He sobbed. How can you be sure? I'm sure, son, I told him confidently. Believe me, I'm sure. We talked for a while longer, and without revealing too much, I managed to convince him of his true parentage. It was like a weight being lifted off his shoulders. However, my brother's involvement as the father of Linda and Tom was not mentioned, revealing that my supposedly perfect family was not as content as I had thought. Both Linda and Tom were aware of their mother's affair with their uncle, but opted to ignore it, unsure of how to address the situation. It was a terrible position to put them in. As for Tim, he was the youngest of the 4 sisters and undoubtedly the most attractive. While Hilly had her charms, Tim's wife added another layer of complexity to my already strained marriage. A few days later, I took all 3 kids out for lunch, and did the most challenging thing I've ever had to do. I disclosed everything I had discovered throughout the day. I anxiously awaited their reactions, fearing the worst. Surprisingly, they handled the news relatively well. Linda shed a few tears, and Tom sat with his head in his hands, clearly distraught. Despite their initial shock, all three expressed a desire to confront their mother immediately. However, I convinced them to hold off as I needed to sort out a few things first. All three of them pledged their love and loyalty to me and were close to cutting ties with Hilly for good. I managed to dissuade them from that, reminding them that despite her mistakes, she had always been a caring mother to them. I spoke about her in a way that didn't quite match my true feelings, especially after hearing the kids' revelations. According to them, Hilly, my supposedly loving wife, had been involved in some kind of relationship with her brother-in-law Tim for a while. However, it probably wasn't long enough for him to be Mike's father. The once-a-month claim might have been an exaggeration too, but none of us were certain. One thing was clear, though. The kids felt relieved to finally share their burden, and all three of them shed tears. Yes, even Tom joined in as we gathered together that evening. Let me correct that last statement. All four of us shed tears. I craved revenge, but I had to find a way to seek it without causing pain to my children. And yes, I chose my words carefully. I meant it when I said I needed revenge. I meant it for him. And yes, I meant it for my children. I pondered for a while but couldn't come up with a grand scheme for revenge. It seemed like a direct confrontation was my only option. Luckily, I had the upcoming event to do just that, the 10th of December. Our family had gathered, as families do. With my parents gone, Bob and I were among the older ones that night. 39 of us sat down for the celebratory dinner, mainly Hilly's side of the family, along with some of our mutual friends. They said the meal was good, but for me, it might as well have been cardboard and dishwater. Then came the speeches. Here we go, I thought. Was it the end, or perhaps just the beginning? I was sweating buckets and trying to calm my nerves with deep breaths. What I had to do wouldn't be easy, but it had to be done. Welcome, everyone, I began, starting with some small talk. Then I steered the conversation towards celebrating 20 years of marriage with my wife, Hilly. But there were some very interesting and personal things about our marriage that I needed to share with everyone. And that's where things were about to get interesting. Laughter filled the room, and there were a few jokes about our bedroom life. Hilly blushed, thinking it was all in good fun. But little did they know how mistaken they were. As the laughter settled, Linda stood up abruptly, followed by Tom, and then Mike, without a word to anyone. The whole table watched, bewildered and curious about what was going on. Come back here, all three of you, Hilly exclaimed, jumping up. Don't be disrespectful to your father. Only Tom glanced back at his mother with a sad shake of his head before joining his siblings outside. David! Hilly called to me, desperate for me to intervene. Do something. Tell them to come back right now. It's all right, dear, I responded firmly. They already know what I'm going to say, and since it concerns them, maybe it's best they're not here. Hilly looked shocked at my response, first surprised by my defiance, then worried as she tried to understand my motives. Sit down, Hilly, I commanded firmly. As I was saying, I continued scanning the faces around me. I've had 20 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage until a few weeks ago. I paused for effect, feeling the tension in the air. Some looked puzzled, others still wore smiles, expecting a joke, but many seemed concerned, surprising me. Imagine my shock when no one spoke up to discover that Linda, my beloved daughter, is not biologically mine. Hilly couldn't hold back her sobs, her hands covering her face, breaking the silence. Would you like to tell everyone who Linda's real father is, Hilly? I asked, but she remained silent, only her crying disrupting the quiet. Fine then, I pressed on. Does anyone else want to confess who's been with my wife behind my back? No one dared to speak, and I stood there, my gaze sharp and accusing, surveying the stunned faces of my family and friends. As terrible as it sounds, there was a strange satisfaction in exposing those who had deceived me. They had no idea how much I had uncovered. I couldn't resist giving my brother Bob a stern look, and he visibly squirmed under my gaze, knowing he had been caught. No one's going to confess? I challenged them. Do I have to reveal the truth then? To my surprise, Bob's wife Pam stood up abruptly. It's not what you think, Davy, she exclaimed, distressed. It wasn't an affair. We just had love a few times to help Hilly get pregnant. The whole family had been eager for a boy, especially my mother, and it seemed doubtful that I could father a child. If someone had dropped a feather at that moment, it would have knocked me over. Pam knew. She knew about her husband, my brother, bothering my daughter. Looking around the table, I saw it divided into two camps. Some were shocked, while others seemed unsurprised. Friends who were unaware, and family members who mostly seemed to be in the loop. As I stood there trying to collect myself, friends began to excuse themselves one by one, leaving around 17 or 18 of us, all relatives. "Why don't you go play over there?" suggested Julie, another of Hilly's sisters, and gradually the younger children were sent off. The teenagers were encouraged to leave too, but it seemed like they were glued to the scene, not willing to miss the drama. "Well, you all seem to know what's going on, don't you?" I exclaimed, looking around. "You're all aware of this mess, except maybe the kids here." A couple of husbands appeared confused, but nobody denied it. "Look, Davy," my brother attempted to explain. "It's not what you think, I swear." He seemed poised to say more, but my expression of pure anger silenced him instantly. "So you all knew that Bob slept with my wife and fathered Linda, huh?" I demanded of the table. Nobody admitted it outright, but again, nobody denied it. "I swear it was just 3 times, Davy." Pam defended herself, her voice rising. Whose ridiculous idea was this anyway? I shouted angrily, my frustration growing. Once again, nobody dared to speak, but too many eyes shifted towards Jan, my mother-in-law. "I should have known," I muttered, acknowledging her role. "Thanks a lot, Mom," I said to her with a heavy heart. "Your desperation for a son has shattered my marriage." "No, Hilly," finally intervened, her voice trembling. "Please, Davy, don't say that. I can't imagine life without you. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive one mistake?" "One mistake?" I echoed incredulously. "Just one mistake?" "Yes, honey," Hilly pleaded tearfully. "It was only that one time. It seems so foolish now, but back then, Mom's plan made sense." "And what about Tom?" I pressed her, my tone firm. "Well, he's yours, of course, Davy," she assured me. "Wrong," I corrected her sternly. "I've had a DNA test done, and his father is the same man as Linda's." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. "What are you saying, David?" Pam exclaimed in shock. "You heard me, Pam," I confirmed, not backing down. "If my dear brother there is Linda's father, then he's also Tom's father." Silence hung heavily in the air as this revelation sunk in. "You scoundrel, Bob!" Pam snapped at her husband, her voice trembling with anger. "You promised me this wouldn't happen, and then you went off and slept with that woman again," Bob muttered, avoiding eye contact, clearly regretting his actions. "And you traitor!" Pam yelled at Hilly, her voice seething with anger. "I agreed to let you have my husband just that one time, and then you continue sleeping with him." With that, she marched 3 steps towards her sister and slapped Hilly hard across the face. "You deceitful!" She spat, striking Hilly repeatedly until someone intervened and pulled her away. Tears streamed down Pam's face as she was restrained. "Are you satisfied, Mom?" I demanded, glaring at Jan, but she remained expressionless, staring straight ahead as Hilly continued to cry into her arms. "So who else has been betraying me?" I challenged the room, locking eyes with Tim, who sat across from me. "You scoundrel!" Julie screamed beside me, shocking me with her outburst. "It's true what they said. You did sleep with her that night at the party." Confusion filled the air as Julie turned to her husband, Ted, who sheepishly admitted to the accusation. "And you, my dear sister," Julie turned her fury towards Hilly, "have you slept with all your brother-in-laws?" "You shameless woman." "Well, she certainly had her way with Tim over there," I interjected, a sense of satisfaction creeping in. Tim's feeble attempts to deny the accusations only fueled the chaos, leading to Julie delivering a swift blow to his nose. "Don't bother coming home tonight," she yelled at him. "In fact, don't ever come back." Pam unleashed her fury on Bob. "I'm divorcing you, and I never want to lay eyes on you again." The 3 upset sisters linked arms and headed for the door. "You're no sister of ours," they yelled back at Hilly as they stormed out. "Feeling pleased now, Jan?" I confronted my mother-in-law, but she remained stoic, staring straight ahead as Hilly continued to cry into her arms. Finally, my father-in-law, Alf, spoke up. "I'm sorry, Davy," Alf began, his voice heavy with regret. "If only I had known." He trailed off, unable to find the right words. But he was the only one who made any attempt at an apology. Then, Brother Bob approached me, his hands outstretched, a look of profound shame on his face. "David," he stammered. "David, what can I say?" "Nothing, you scoundrel," I retorted, my words lacking real force. I swung at him, catching him on the chin with little strength behind it. Yet the timing was perfect, and he stumbled backward, tripping over a chair and landing sprawled on the floor, making no effort to rise. That seemed to mark the end of the festivities as the atmosphere soured, draining the fun out of the evening. Hilly didn't return home that night, and after grabbing a few things, she never returned. The kids were adamant about not speaking to her for a while. Despite my own feelings of hatred towards her, however, I had to prioritize the well-being of the kids. Eventually, they softened and allowed her back into their lives, but things were never the same. I remained dad, while she became more like a distant figure. The family was torn apart. Two of the sisters who left that night filed for divorces, leaving only Pam to stick with Bob. However, she gave him a rough time, believing in giving him a taste of his own medicine. Pam showed up a couple of nights later when the kids were out, and her intentions quickly became clear. Whether it was revenge or a way to get back at me, I never found out, but I certainly got my payback. There was no love or tenderness. We just engaged in a physical frenzy for hours. It felt strange, like being intimate with my wife, but different. Afterward, she thanked me and left. It was only months later that I discovered she had been doing the same with Bob's friends, one by one. Would their marriage survive this? I didn't have a clue, and honestly, it wasn't my concern, but I could imagine it being pretty rough for my brother. About 3 weeks later, one of my other sisters, the attractive one, gave me a call and asked me out for dinner. I agreed, and we went out, had a meal, chatted, flirted, kissed, and ended up in bed. However, this time, it felt different. After the initial excitement, we shared a deeper connection, making love reminiscent of the early days with Hilly. I couldn't fathom why Tim had strayed from his marriage, but it definitely wasn't due to any lack of desire for intimacy. So one of the sweetest twists in this whole saga was when Yan's long-suffering husband, Alf, finally had enough of her meddling. He went and did something unexpected, bought a 40-foot yacht, and spent the rest of his days sailing around Europe. Can you believe it? It was quite the convenient arrangement for me and the kids. We often joined him for sailing trips, exploring places like the south of France, Mallorca, and the Canary Islands. Those were some cherished memories, I tell you. Now Linda, she had her own little adventure while sailing. She crossed paths with a young Spaniard, and before we knew it, they tied the knot. Turns out, he hailed from a family that owned one of Europe's largest boat marinas, which was quite advantageous, to say the least. As for the boys, well, they're taking their time and not rushing into marriage too soon. Perhaps they learned a thing or two from their father's experience. But hey, they've got plenty of time ahead of them. Now, as for me, I don't have much contact with Hilly these days. But the kids keep me updated. Apparently, she's taking life one day at a time and often inquires about me. I just nod in response, you know. Oh, and as for my own love life, well, I'm considering giving marriage another shot. But this time, I'm looking inward. There's this mutual affection between us, but we're both a bit cautious. Time will tell. I want to be certain that I'm not getting married partly out of spite toward Hilly. Although I must admit, the thought of her reaction if I did tie the knot again brings a smile to my face.